Hello and a very warm welcome to all the viewers of Detox, that is Disruptive Literacy Talks. And this is Tanmay Prakash, your host of the session. Detox aims at coming together in eradicating illiteracy and focusing upon the foundational literacy and numeracy, as committed under Sustainable Development Goal 4 and in India's National Education Policy. Detox is an initiative of Global Dream, a disruptive movement for universal foundational literacy and numeracy. It was launched in 2014 by Dr. Sunita Gandhi, educationist and former economist at World Bank. By using disruptive and research-based methods and processes, Global Dream's aim is to make India 100% literate in a time-bound mission. And moreover, we believe in disrupting the status quo when best is not the enough. Moving on to today's session, it will be based on mainstream gender equality approach. And with this, I would like to introduce you with the speaker of the session, Ms. Sohini Bhattacharya, CEO, Breakthrough, who will be speaking upon the topic transforming gender norms and using mainstream gender equality approach within the government schools system. Sohini Bhattacharya is an entrepreneur and social change enthusiast who has 25 plus years of experience in development sector. Currently, she is CEO at Breakthrough, an organization working in India using multimedia, popular culture, leadership development, and community engagement strategies to prevent gender-biased violences. Breakthrough works with 5 lakh adolescents and 3,000 adults across 5 states of India, and its media reaches millions across the country. Sohini started her career working on a UNICEF-funded project to create communication material for the Year of Girls Child with active participation from rural women in the villages of West Bengal and with the Child in Need Institute, that is CINI, a premier maternal and child health organization in India. We at Detox are glad to have Ms. Sohini Bhattacharya with us. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to Detox.
Thank you, Tanmay. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and talking about Breakthrough's work with the gender equity curriculum that we have created.
Yes, ma'am. And as I mentioned in your introduction that you have a 25 plus years of experience in the field of development. So when was the time when you decided that you want to get into the development sector and do something for the development of the girl child and women, the underprivileged women? And what was your motivation behind that?
So I've grown up in a very liberal household. My parents always encouraged me to actually think for myself and stand on my own 2 feet, was what my mother said again and again when I was growing up. Right after my masters, I used to do a lot of theater in college. As part of my interest and passion. And because of that, I just after my MA exam, somebody actually asked me to whether I would work on this UNICEF-funded project of creating, communication materials with village women. And when I went there, I made friends with a large group of village women who were very different from me, but their resilience, their sense of jugaad, doing with nothing, doing a lot with nothing, and their whole stories of normalizing violence really moved me. And I think it was at that point of time I decided that if I could actually help women and girls to have the same opinions, the same voices, the same kind of opportunities that I have had in my life, then I would kind of consider it as some kind of an achievement. And so, I shelved whatever plans I had at that point of time of a career, maybe in academics or something else. And I decided that I will work with women and girls. And so I've worked with women all my life. And now, in Breakthrough, we work with large groups of adolescents, 11 to 18-year-olds and young adults of 19 to 25-year-olds. And that's absolutely fantastic to center, voices of young people in this whole discourse around gender-based violence.
Yes, ma'am. And as you mentioned that you have been working for the women and the girl child. So in a country like India, we have people where they stop girls for being educated some in some places, and they also stop women for their for allowing their rights. So what were the challenges faced by you when you started working on in this field? Like, how did you motivated people?
So, when I started working on this field, my attention was on women's economic empowerment, and
Hmm.
I worked with CINI and later on with another organization, a couple of organizations, for a large part of the 90s on economic empowerment and women's access to capital, their access to market, and I found out that just having an access to income doesn't really solve a lot of the discrimination that women and girls face as women and girls in our country. If just having an economic, just having income would actually solve the problem, then we would have solved the problem by now. So who earns that money, who spends that money? Does having money actually ensures that you live a life free from discrimination and violence? Were some of the questions that over and over really bothered me. And so when I joined Breakthrough, where we take a norm change approach to the work, I think that's where we need to kind of focus on how actually the behaviors and the attitudes, but the norms at the social level actually changes to make sure that women and girls reach their full potential. So that's how my thinking has evolved over the years.
Yes, ma'am. And when we start working in a field and we gain an experience, slowly and gradually things improve, and we get more of information in that, and we evolve new ways of bringing the changes and their ways of implementation. And ma'am, moving further, like how discrimination in gender, like discriminatory gender norms and the practices can affect in the education, the early education of a child.
So, if you look at India and in many other countries across the globe,
Hmm.
uh, the deep-rooted gender bias and the patriarchal norms that affect women and girls starts from birth. You know, you would see, girls getting lesser nutrition than boys in families. In terms of education, you will see more girls enrolled in the government schools and more boys being sent to private schools. While enrollment for girls in primary schools has increased hugely in our country, if you look at the ESSER report of 2018, focusing in the early years, even now there is a stark difference in the enrollment pattern of girls and boys in the 4 to 8 age group across India, where more girls really get enrolled, but even then there's a difference. Among
Hmm.
children in the 6 to 8 years age bracket, 61% of girls attend a government school versus 52% of all boys. And this difference grows as children get older because it's perceived that private schools will give you a better education and government schools will not give you such a good education. And so, it's okay to send girls to government schools, but for boys, we want better outcome. If you look at 2018, and that's, because of COVID, we don't really have updated data for the last 2 years. 13% of the girls in the age group of 15 to 18 were not enrolled in school. So early marriage, lack of safety in and on the way to school, low aspiration related to girls' education lead them to dropping out of school. The number of schools also decreases sharply beyond upper primary. I think in 2015-16, for every 100 elementary schools in rural India, there were 14 offering secondary schools, and only 6 offering, I think, higher secondary grades. It doesn't help because, girls, parents do not want to send a girl 10 kilometers away from her village to a secondary school. Yeah. So those stacks very, oddly against girls' education and leads to dropouts. The other way that this discrimination manifests is, and prevalent largely across Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, it's perceived that educating a girl child won't provide as much return on investment as boys' education, and and the proximity of good schools, as parents are comfortable sending boys further than girls, thinking about security. The other thing that also inhibits girls from going to school is the lack of, infrastructure around menstrual health management. So if you do not have toilets in schools or a proper way to dispose of sanitary pads, it will keep menstruating adolescent girls away from schools, even if they're near to your home. Yeah. One of the pressing reasons, and we do not talk about this very often, is why girls are unable to go to school in India is that the burden of housework. As both parents step out to work, mother goes to an informal sector or works as an agricultural labor to substantiate the family income. Girls from underprivileged backgrounds are shouldering the burden of care and housework. In a report in 2019 to the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, they had said that 40% of 15 to 18-year-old girls were out of school, and among them, 65% were engaged in household work. Can you imagine the number? In its 2015 report on gender equity in India, McKinsey Global Institute found that Indian women perform nearly 10 times of unpaid care work as men. That's almost 3 times more than the global average. So girls who do 2 hours of housework per day have a 63% probability of finishing secondary schools, the 2018 update of that report said. So we are battling against so many odds, when it comes to girls' education, until and unless we really change the way parents value girls and value education for girls, we will not see this changing in the short term.
Yes, ma'am. And as I was going through your work, your organization has also taken out some music videos such as Manke Manjire and Babul. So, what were your experiences from that music album, and what was the basic idea behind that music album?
So when you talk about norm change, it's the dominant culture within a certain reference group. It could be a village, it could be a family, it could be a community. The dominant culture there is very often dictated by the entertainment, by what we call pop culture. Bollywood films, music, our own music from the community. Very often, those cultural norms do not become very apparent to you until and unless you have a entertaining medium talking to you about this. So what Breakthrough has always done is take that dominant culture, flip it, and show you that an alternative is possible. So for Manke Manjiri, when that was a time when music videos were very popular, but a lot of those music videos were about objectifying women. At that point of time, Breakthrough took a music video that told the story of a real life woman who lived an abusive relationship and actually, drove an auto to kind of find a livelihood. So we took that woman and put her in Rajasthan. We showed her as driving trucks around the deserts of Rajasthan. And it talked about a real life person and the problems that she faces. It became an instant hit. It stayed on the top of the charts for about 6 weeks and became a conversation starter in terms of domestic violence, girls' rights, women's dreams and aspirations at that point of time. So that's how we have used music videos. Even now, we have, I think, about 6, 7 music videos that we have done over the last 3, 4 years. We are trying to see whether we can turn that into an album that talks about how men can share housework with women. It talks about early marriage, so different kinds of things. And when it's kind of put to you in a non-threatening manner through an entertaining medium, you begin to see the problem. Otherwise, it's so normalized that you do not really see that problem as something that you need to kind of think of. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And ma'am, as we are talking about the gender norm changes, so how can we implement the gender norm changes in the primary education?
So our experience is in the middle school, in elementary, but even for primary education, if you look at the textbooks, we are still looking at textbooks where women are shown as people who stay inside, men are showing as people who go outside, father goes to work, mother works in house. These things need to change. So that content needs to actually, and I know that number of state governments have started working on this, but the content needs to really change. And that change has to also be reflected in the changes in way we are teaching, young people. Yeah, so bring in more experiential learning methods, bringing rich content which shows the gender diversity of the country would be some way to kind of attend to this at the primary level. At the elementary level, and I can talk about that in a little while. I can talk about what Breakthrough has done for classes, let's say 6, 7, and 8 and above, through the curriculum that we have designed.
Yes, ma'am. And before moving further, I would like to take a question from the live question chat. That Shivansh Jaiswal has to ask that, ma'am, what is the role of FLN for gender norms or gender equality?
And FLN stands for the frontline
FLN stands for Foundational Literacy and Numeracy.
foundational literacy and numeracy. So I'm not familiar with that. See, there are many research that exists to see that literacy is a very good way to actually build up agency. See, when we talk about agency, um, um, building up agency in women and girls, there are 3, 4 things that we talk about. One is that the power within. How am I holding on to the power that is within me? So self-confidence, boosting of self-efficacy, boosting of what I can, what's possible for me to do, aspirations and things. And these come, as you introduce foundational literacy and numeracy, it kind of builds up that agency. The second thing is that household, decisions. Where is the money to be spent? What kind of nutrition, do I go for? All of these gets boosted up. If you do have a, have literacy and numeracy within your thing. The other things is that what we find is that when we look at households, women's mobility is an issue. I don't know whether there's a correlation between literacy and numeracy and mobility, but definitely when you work in gender norms, there is a reflection on mobility, and that's really a very important aspect of women's agency. So when foundational literacy and numeracy builds up agency, then there is a definite improvement in our uptake of gender norms.
Yes, ma'am. And when we talk about the government schools, so what could be the strategies for adopting a gender transformative approaches in the designing, implementing, and measuring the programs in the government schools?
So, see, the deep-rooted gender bias that exists in our society are propagated by the schools as well. As I said, if you look at the textbooks, even the classroom discourses, where teachers often breed an atmosphere that implies that boys, on an average, understand science, technology, engineering, mathematics much better, whereas girls perform better in, reading, writing, art, literature. Such classroom discourses result in similar behavior being adopted among kids. So each student kind of shows a conformity to their respective gender roles. So even in how schools treat girls, students, and boys, there has to be a gender, a gender orientation in that. So when we worked in schools in Haryana, we would often go there, and we'll find that when it came to looking after the guests, making teas, the teachers would inevitably turn to the older girls and say, you do that. When it came to, carrying a bench from one classroom to the other classroom for all the guests to be able to sit, the boys will be called. So the thing is that the implication that you are throwing is that girls are anyway biologically weaker and are not able to do that. I've seen this also in camps that are run for young boys and girls. Even girls and boys from privileged backgrounds, they come to a camp and the harder tasks are given to the boys and the lesser tasks are given to the girls. You are creating a discrimination right there. So fundamentally, schools need to become more receptive for girls and deliver education of better quality. Firstly, the curriculum itself needs to enable girls to challenge gender stereotypes and become more assertive. We teach that girls are to be, docile and quiet and agyakari. The word in Hindi is agyakari. So they should be obedient. They should listen. There's no way to actually for a girl to kind of challenge that. So we should do that. We also need to make sure that we're creating very gender balanced content, and the curriculum itself should bring on more progressive content. The world is moving at a fast pace. Are our curriculums, keeping up with that? Secondly, stronger efforts are needed to enhance the agency of girls themselves. I just spoke about, self-esteem, confidence, challenge gender bias, and build their leadership, because girls can be as good leaders as boys are, and we need to kind of build up the leadership, because anyway girls will have to lead a lot of stuff going forward, even within their families. They are they are the leaders, and sometimes they do not kind of have the ability to rise up to those roles. Thirdly, it is particularly important to ensure that all teachers are trained and sensitized to gender concerns. Teacher training is such a neglected area in our country. They receive very little training. Firstly, in recognizing their own unconscious biases, and secondly, in how to kind of work with them. Yeah, a teacher might not have an idea on how to address discrimination and difference with regard to class, caste, socioeconomic background, because she also comes from the same patriarchal upbringing and conditioning. I must mention Breakthrough's work on a gender equity curriculum here called Taruki Toli in this context. The idea is built around the school as a fulcrum for norm change. If we are to change discriminatory gender norms and ensure that girls reach their full potential, then we have to shape adolescents' gender attitudes at an age when your views are still malleable, and you are still open to and curious about questioning some of the very hard to shift norms. Why do this happen? Why do my mother always ask my sister to do the housework and not me? Or why do my father always goes out to work and not my mother? For this to happen at a large scale, schools are the best institutions, to collectivize adolescents, create a more gender sensitive education system, which is empathetic and responsive to the needs of adolescent girls and boys. And this is important for both girls and boys. So this curriculum is available for 11 to 18-year-olds in schools that we work in. Where we find that girls have dropped out of school in the 15 to 18 age group, we often do this in the community as well. Our sessions build aspirations, agency, and decision-making skills so that they're able to avoid early marriage, finish school, and have actually career choices. As a critical outcome, once adolescents complete this program, we encourage them as young adults in the 19 to 25 age group to become change agents in their own communities. So take action against gender-based violence and discrimination around them. We also encourage a lot of intergender and intergenerational conversations. In the villages of India, we often find that even though schools are coeducational on paper, there is literally a wall between the girls section and the boys section. They are not encouraged to sit together. They are not encouraged to talk together. It's looked down as a taboo. But if you want to really encourage healthy relationships, you have to let them each treat each other like friends. So, all of that. Also, we often find that adolescents from rural and marginalized backgrounds often do not speak to their parents about, whether it's a relationship or it's menstruation or changes in their bodies. Difficult subjects are thought of as taboo subjects. So they do not open up. And so there is no trust built between parents and youngsters. So we also encourage a lot of intergenerational conversation with parents. Yeah. And finally, the engagement with communities, which ensures a greater gender sensitivity overall. So we've had a rigorous RCT, which has, for 2.5 years when we ran this program in Haryana across 150 government schools, we had a very rigorous RCT done by JPAL to evaluate the Haryana school program. And this is what we learned. We learned that children from homes with more gender regressive attitudes, like the bottom 20%, after our program, it looked like they have attitudes like children from regular homes. Yeah, there was a significant shift in students' attitudes on norms related to women's paid employment. 12.9% increase. Huge increase to girls' higher education. 8.4% increase. Boys' behaviors shifted more significantly than girls, indicating that there are greater social constraints for girls to change their behaviors. Right. So JPAL is now, doing a longitudinal cohort study of this over a longer period with the same 13, 14,000 youngsters that we did the first evaluation with, to see if over a long period of time, these kind of attitudes are sticking or not. And in the middle of the pandemic, 2020 May, we found that even 4 years after we have moved away from that program, there are 16% positive shift among girls for higher education. So that's a huge kind of shift, and so that's how we have been working that. Now we
Yes,
actually
ma'am.
have worked on, have taken this to other schools in UP and Jharkhand, and also a little bit in Bihar. And so I'll stop here and I'll let you ask the next question.
Yes, ma'am. So there is a thought coming into my mind, and that is that when we like, what I feel is, to stop the gender discrimination, girls or the women should also think in the same manner. Like, I remember incidents from my school time, that once I was working in my home and helping my mother into some of her work, and one of my friend was passing by my home, and she saw me helping my mother doing some work. So she was like laughing at me, and then she started to make jokes out of me in the school, that ये तो देखो अपनी मम्मी की घर में help करता है, and somewhat like that. So what is your experience? What I would like to know it from you, that uh, how can we like also educate girl child or the women to like also speak about them, like
Yeah.
we boys, if we boys or men's are talking about the gender equality, then they should also speak about the same.
So, girls are part of the same, patriarchal setup as boys are. And we often normalize a lot of things. Like we think housework is meant for only girls and not for boys, right? Even mothers, do not think that the son should be actually helping in housework. So if we start right from childhood, if these things are broken even at a family level, where more boys are introduced to helping at home, there's things can change over a period of time. What we did was that we actually created. It's because we do a lot of work in media. We actually created very short audio and videos. Creating these two characters called Pinky and Pankaj, who are your everyday average 15-year-olds in an Indian village, right? And we really actually um, created a whole lot of messages that we want to pass on to young girls and young boys. And we made Pinky and Pankaj talk about them rather than us as adults coming and talking about them. We said, let Pinky and Pankaj take these conversations forward. And housework was a huge, big conversation around that. Not just girls but boys also laugh at boys who help their parents at home, yeah, or do housework. So how do we, through a very non-threatening, very entertaining media approach, we break that, and we show this media, and then we have a conversation with parents being there, with children being there, on what do you think about boys sharing housework. And yes, initially, there were girls who would laugh at that or giggle at that, but as they realize that there is, this is not a gender segregated division of work. This is for a family, everybody has to pull in together. So slowly, with dialogues, with all of this, things have changed quite a bit, but a lot of it begins at home. So if you kind of manage your behavior at home, and if you are interested in introducing children to to a gender sensitive atmosphere at your own home right from the beginning, then as you grow up, a lot of these things are actually just go away.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that the dialogue which is always said, there are some dialogues which states the gender discrimination, such as when a boy cries, "Ladki ho
Yeah.
kya?"
Yeah.
And when a boy works at his home, अरे क्या लड़कियों की तरह काम कर रहे हो, अरे चलो बाहर चले. So I think these dialogues should be changed, and we should normalize them, that a
Yeah.
boy can also cry, a boy can also work at his home. So I think there is a need of normalizing things now.
Yes, and also, and I know this was also one of your questions. The first thing is to realize that this has to actually also happen with boys when they're still young. So during adolescence and young adulthood, there's a critical period of opportunity to engage boys and young men in understanding why gender equality is good for everyone and not just for girls. It's good for boys also. Um, Also, how can boys use the power and the privilege and the entitlement that they already have, that they're born with, which girls are not born with, right? So if they have that power and privilege, and if they're aware about that, boys and young men have the ability to shift, the dominant culture and the ideas about gender. The other thing is that boys and men are also socialized in the same milieu, and they also grow up with senses of masculinity, that for a boy, he or she has to be a macho man who protects his family, takes care of everyone, is not vulnerable, can never show his emotions, can never cry. These are very detrimental to achieving equality of any kind. So it's important to address in which, ways in which men's experience of life events are also shaped, and that they're constrained by the same cultural norms, that also disempower women. So we shouldn't be only caring for these gender related norms because they deprive women. We should also be careful about men's rights, in this whole thing, not just their rights, but also how, if we do not talk about how masculinity actually disempowers both men and women, it can impede healthcare access, education, and other services and delivery. It's important for the men and boys to understand the responsible use of power. You have power, you have power over someone, and the power to act on your own behalf. How are you using that power? It's very important to actually talk about that.
Yes, ma'am. And I think it's in high time that it is always said that when to boys that तुम तो घर के लड़के हो, you should be more responsible, क्योंकि ये तो बहन तुम्हारी तो लड़की है, ये तो नहीं भी पढ़ेगी तो शादी करके चली जाएगी, तुम्हें घर संभालना है. So why
Yes.
not we teach our children that लड़का हो या लड़की, both have to work and take proper responsibilities of their home.
Yeah.
Like if a
Yes.
boy has a responsibility to run the household, then why can't a woman or a girl child could be given the same responsibility?
Yes, and for that, the parents have to actually look at the value that the girl brings. The girl is, as much capable of as a boy to bring money home, to earn for the family, to do all kinds of things. But you are not doing it. At this point of time, you're not seeing that value. You think a boy is better equipped to do that, and a girl is not, because what do we learn right from the time when we are born, that girls are parayadhan, we you the
Exactly.
your family is just a custodian till she gets married and goes to somebody else's house. That's the perceived thing. Until and unless you are changing that perception, and looking at women as human beings, in their own full right, and rather than as parayadhan, how discriminatory is it to be classified as a dhan, as an object, really, so I think things begin a lot from homes.
Yes, ma'am. And ma'am, like you and your organization Breakthrough is working for the gender-based norms, and other like-minded organizations are also working for the gender equality. What according to your experience, could be the approach from the government in schools for the government for the gender equality?
So, I mean, I can speak about what we are doing with the government in Punjab.
Mhm.
We have had a partnership with the Punjab state government, across 4,700 government schools, where our gender equity curriculum is being integrated into the syllabi for classes 6 to 8 across English, moral science, and social studies. So we are looking at the curriculum and just revamping that. And SCRT, I think, has just signed up on that curriculum. After doing that curriculum, we are also training about 290 master trainers who will in turn train 20,000 teachers. Yeah, who will not just be taught in delivering the curriculum, but also about their own understanding of gender, of discrimination, of violence. And we will ensure the quality of delivery through a very rigorous monitoring and and take best content support, where JPAL will do a proper evaluation to assess the impact of this, what changes this is actually bringing. And also we will we'll create an app with a lot of content which teachers can access, and to clear their own ideas from time to time about gender or about rights or about empowerment for women and girls. So this is something that we hope we will be able to kind of fully roll out over the next 2-3 years. And we encourage other state governments to actually partner with Breakthrough and other organizations in able to do that, so that we have very gender equitable content. We have teachers who are trained and empowered, and we have students who are then learning about it through the school curriculum itself. So
Yes, ma'am. And the session, as the session moves on, I think this is the high time to bring in Dr. Sunita Gandhi, the lead worker at Global Dream, and the person behind Detox, to move the session forward and have a bit discussion with you as the discussant of the session.
thank you,
Hello,
Tanta.
ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, indeed, with Shohini. Shohini, I've been listening intently to your presentation, and I find it fascinating that you're working on an issue that's been a perennial issue, something that has plagued us for a long, long time. I sometimes watch these old movies with my mother, 1960s, 1970s, and I find there's such a lot of ill treatment of the women that is shown on the screen. That these things are really deep rooted. It's almost taken for granted. The women will be treated in a certain way. They're treated as objects. So you've obviously pointed out the problem really, very well, and I see it everywhere. As a woman who came out of the system, I still feel, and perhaps you do, there's a boys' world out there, even in the corporate sector, and they tend to have better negotiations, and be able to work out deals a lot better than women. And you see, how many people are getting Series A funding or Series B funding and all that. You see, it's all boys. So and women may have very good ideas, but they have a different way of presenting. They don't plug in as easily into the same networks. So we're talking about a humongous problem, not one that just begins in the classroom and ends in the classroom. And so, what are your views about, if you're going to make sweeping changes? I mean, of course, every foundation like yours, which is working on this in such a enthusiastic way, is making a dent, and a big dent, in your case in particular. So, but can the dent be bigger? Can there be some macro level systemic changes that can bring about a far more profound change? And what could those be? I'm talking about policy, governance, those issues, by act of government, top down processes in
So,
particular.
Sunitaji, that's $1 million question, really, and one that I think we need to really address as an emergency, as an urgent problem. Especially in India, we talk about how empowering women will add so many zeros to the GDP. We also talk about the opportunity costs of not educating women, not encouraging women to be out there. We do not often talk about that. A poor girl from a very marginalized background do not need to reach her full potential because she will improve her country's economy. She needs to do that because it's a right. As a human being, she has to be seen as a human being who has that right to do that. But of course, the opportunity cost is something that we should always also keep in mind. One of the things I think is the popular culture has to actually address this issue. You still have Bollywood making films where men are shown as this macho, heroes with muscles. They come and beat people up. So that becomes an accepted norms that if I want to be really a man, that's the behavior that I have to emulate. Um, there are films which are being made focusing on women as empowered women. We need more of that. We need to show that whole thing of equality in the society. So that's one of the things that I know that's difficult to do, because then there are issues of TRP and audience and all of that. But popular culture is something that we really need to look at. Schools is something that I have also already talked about. I think this whole thing about having 50% women in corporate boards, there is a law around that. Is that being followed? What is the penalty for not following that? The 50% representation in parliament, that's something that, again, that has to be looked at. It has happened in the Panchayati Raj system, but again, there, we all know that how women might be the panchayat head, but actual decisions are made either by her husband, and now even more so by the son. I had somebody come and said, I've heard about Pradhan Pati, but now I have started seeing Pradhan Putra as well. So, so all of these are issues that policies alone cannot handle. You can make 10,000 policies, but no, if norms at the community level are still that going to be that men are much stronger and better at decision making than women, then we are going to have Pradhan Patis and Pradhan Putras making decisions all our lives, right? So there has to be a large scale norm change, and a organization like Breakthrough or somebody other alone will not be able to do that. We really need government will to look at how our Panchayati Raj system, how our frontline health workers are looking at gender. Are they gender sensitive? Are they gender aware? How are school teachers looking at gender? How are school principals looking at gender? That entire frontline, duty bearers that governments employ, can we look at really training them on gender sensitive behaviors, gender sensitive policies, how to look at within classrooms and how to look at within their homes also. So until and unless we really approach this at a scale, we will be able to make only a dent, and that will not be enough.
Yeah, it's, points well taken. I'm just thinking to what extent uh, you can change the equation when we're dealing with education, because obviously these are the future of any country in the world.
Yes.
So, if we've done a survey in City Montessori School, a school that my family runs here in Lucknow, of gender biases, and they're rampant. I mean,
Yes.
absolutely rampant. And this is a progressive school with children coming from privileged families. Even the teachers are hugely biased, as you've said, but of course, it's a nice thing to have research basis to it. So, how do you change that? Is a very interesting question. Um, Maybe one of the ways would be that you're changing the equation from underneath. So, you've talked about curriculum, and maybe changing that curriculum would mean that we have a breakthrough in some ways.
Yes.
Um, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So that curriculum really needs to change, and I have a 16-year-old, and of course I've seen the curriculums in her school change over the period of time, but there is still a lot of, even at a school level, even if you create a content, the content is one of the first steps, but the attitudes of teachers also need to kind of change. Even in very privileged schools, I have seen schools actually discouraging conversations around gender, sexuality. There's no comprehensive sexuality education in our country. So young boys and girls do not learn about bodily changes in a very open, um, clear way, so that there is no taboo around this. There's no hush hush around this. So even in privileged schools, these are not talked about in very clear terms. Can we not have something like this for older adolescents? Definitely, we talk about menstruation to older adolescents in some of our community-based programs, and we also invite boys to be part of that, because it's a bodily change that both boys and girls are going through, and you need to learn about that. We've run classes showing them how to make, sanitary pads from waste cloths, cloth pads, which are much more environment friendly. And we've had boys who have taken that training. And one of the things that we saw during the lockdown is that there was a boy from a very remote village in UP, in Gorakhpur district, and he saw that women in his families were running out of sanitary pads during the lockdown. A, because there are no supplies coming, and B, women felt ashamed to ask their male members who were going out of house to bring sanitary pads back for them. So Aditya, this boy, he said, since I have gone through this training in breakthrough, I can teach my family members of my home to make cloth pads. So we spoke to them, and they were like outraged. How can you, a boy, talk about this kind of a thing? He said, no, but these are changes, that biological changes that all of us should know about. It's very clear to me that this has happened. This happens with girls, and I have very clear information, and this is no taboo. So then, the way he won over the women, he sat down and he did this, and he did this for his entire community. And then as stories like this spread, people from other places in Lucknow and Gorakhpur started taking this up. So, these kind of, when we talk about gender and rights to young adolescents, we often find that what happens is that they start taking action not just for themselves, of course, their own lives and decisions, but for their entire families, for the entire communities, for societies. And so I think it's very, very important to have that conversation at a very young
How fascinating. Just absolutely
age.
adorable listening to you, because you obviously making such a tremendous change, and these stories do matter. And I'm thinking about the JPAL research that you mentioned earlier. Regarding that, the difference, like for example, 16% of girls are more going to, say, university in sort of longitudinal study, to the extent there was longitudinal, given the number of years in between. But obviously, it is quite phenomenal. And I was wondering if there is more compelling research as well besides the JPAL one, which can bring up the government into being swayed to change, for example, the NCRT curriculum. Because that's where it all begins, isn't it? Um,
Yes.
and majority of the schools follow that, or even the private sector takes cue from that as to how to mold their books, and
Yeah.
create some kind of a rubble at the top. Really, a lot of
Would love to do that. And, as part of the National Education Policy, NEP 2020, gender equality has been given a huge role within that. But how are we going to actually roll it out? How are you going to implement it? So in there, I think private-public partnership, as well as a three-way partnership with NGOs, governments, and private sector really needs to happen, because this is a fundamental problem of our societies, and not just India, across South Asia, across many countries, and even in developing countries, in developed countries. This is a problem. And if we cannot address it at a young age, we'll never be able to make a dent, because,
yeah,
by the
and
time
this
you're
is
grown
the
up, you're done. Yeah.
crux of the problem. If you begin early, and actually, I saw a video to that extent, that biases are really created or engineered very early on. So if somehow we can address that through education, because education is a controlled environment, and
Yes.
somehow educate parents in the process as well, uh, we may get to a lot more outcome than so many other things we can do. But
Yes.
it's really kudos to you. What you're doing is just phenomenal, and
Thank
really needed, and just more power to you and to break through. Really
thank
fantastic.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We hope that more progressive state governments and the national government does come across, it'll be fantastic, and we urge them to really do that. We've seen things happening in Maharashtra, in Kerala. There have been some attempts at rewriting content. I think that needs to happen everywhere.
Yeah. Yes. Perfect. So Tanmay is back, our host.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Ma'am, before moving on, there was a question in chat which seems to be very relevant. So, one final question to you. Anushri has to ask that girl child classroom attendance and retention ratio is still low in the rural areas. Please share
Yes.
your insights on this.
Yes, and I mentioned that, and the other thing is that with COVID-19, UNICEF estimates that 132 million girls will be out of school, in which 34 million could be in primary school. Yeah. So, uh, as we know, the results of this are very broad and severe. So, increased child marriages, teenage pregnancies, poor nutrition, all of those kind of things. So, I think we have been consistently talking to parents and at the community level of the importance of sending girls back to school post the lockdown. Yeah. Um, there has been surge in underage marriages. I think we had a Childline itself reported 5,000 cases last year. I think there should be a lot of that has happened. We did a very quick survey in the last few months to find out what is happening because of COVID-19 to women and girls. And 18% of the respondents mentioned that educational institutions are closed without any other facilities or support. In many places, students are not able to access technology to attend online classes. And in some places, despite attending online classes, 11% said that it's just not as effective as classroom learning. So we need to figure out how to open schools as soon as possible with all the COVID protocol and everything maintained, and how to talk to parents about sending their girls back to school. So that is anyway a problem. As this person who has the question mentioned, it's a problem. It's an ongoing problem. COVID-19 has exacerbated that problem. So let's keep talking to girls. To parents. Let's keep talking to parents about sending their girls back to school, educating girls. And looking at how educating girls can actually help you get through other kind of problems. So keeping those channels of communication open is very, very important.
Yes, ma'am. And any final comments, Sunita, ma'am?
No, I'd say more courage to Shohiniji. We are behind you, with you, in this endeavor, for not just womankind, but for humankind.
Thank you, Sunita ji. Thank you, Tanmay. This was a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And so, with this, we move to the end of the detox session. To learn more about Global Dream 30 Hours Foundational Literacy and Numeracy project, do visit www.globaldream.guru, and you can also WhatsApp us on 740-840-6000. With this, I would like to thank Ms. Sohini Bhattacharya for coming to our session and telling us such wonderful things. And also, I would like to thank Dr. Sunita Gandhi for participating in the session as a discussant and giving this session new dimensions. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.